Paul,
What's
welcome
up,
back.
Mike?
We've
Yeah,
been
good to
gone
see
for a
you
few
here.
weeks on this series.
We've had other things to talk about, but
Yeah.
we're back at it with the MBA series.
We are back at it. We had an exciting announcement about some new shows, and we had a good conversation about shows in general with Chris. And yeah, it's good to be back into the MBA series.
I've been loving this series so much, and I know there's so much more still yet to go. But the feedback. The reason I love it is the feedback we get from people, right? And
Yeah.
someone just sent you that letter a day or two ago, and
Yeah.
we've gotten such great response that this is something people really needed and wanted. So it's good to be doing it.
Yeah, it's opened up the door to a lot of. I've had several conversations with people since we started this series that, just people that are interested in starting a new shop or maybe started in the last few years that, are just even in this early part of the series have gotten some knowledge out of it and and have more questions. Right. So we've had some really good conversations after. So if you're listening and you have questions, just know that, we're all more than happy to, connect and dig into any questions you might have. And we don't necessarily know all the right answers, but we know what we've done and what's worked for us, and happy to share.
And we know experts in different areas.
That's our cheat code. We just know we know a lot of people for sure.
And speaking of that, we recently talked to Keith. Why don't you give us a recap of the last episode, Mike?
Yeah. So in our last episode, talking with Keith Grano from Titans of CNC, we'd gotten through all the way to kind of funding your shop, and then talked with Keith about starting to put machines in your shop, so you can start making parts and start making chips and start making money. Mm-hmm. And, now I think we start to bridge into a piece that maybe for a lot of startups comes late in the game, but, given my background and certainly yours, Paul, I think is something that should come a lot earlier in the game. We start talking about that digital backbone.
Yeah.
What that means, like your tech stack, people will call it. It's an important piece.
It's hugely important. I'd say it's just as important as any other. And I've, maybe I can, share a couple anecdotes. We have had customers that have decided to get ProShop before they even opened their doors as a shop, before they even put out their sign and open their website. It's like, I need my digital backbone, just as much as I need my physical machines in place.
Yeah. And I can tell you from somebody that went from a little bit of a digital backbone to ProShop, for example, if I were starting fresh today, that's how I would start. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I've told a few people I would have my digital backbone in place, and the first PO I placed in my ERP system would be for my first machine.
Right.
Because I just think it's a whole lot easier to start correctly than then try to rebuild things.
Yeah. Well, it would be like trying to, start a company without an email address. You got to have these essential things, but people don't necessarily think about all the elements of a backbone as what might be most essential. So we are joined today by our guest who has a deep background in tech stacks, and he is actually a former guest where we covered AI. Bryce Barnes. Good to have you here, Bryce.
Hey, thanks so much, Paul. And Mike, it's great to see you guys again. And I think this is a really cool conversation. I think it's foundational to any business, even if it's not a job shop, a fabrication shop. I think the tech stack, your digital strategy should be core to what you're doing. And I'm really excited about this. So let's take it and explore the topic.
Yeah, let's talk about what a tech stack is, maybe to start with. What things does somebody need to be thinking about in their business from, even starting out there, you need an email address, right? And that can be at Gmail, or that could be at your domain, kind of all the way through the end of the process there.
Well, that's probably a good way to frame it. I think of it as any software that is involved in any aspect of your value stream from even, maybe even prior to your value stream, but maybe we talk about what's creating value in your business. So starting from, your marketing, trying to find a customer, trying to win that customer, quote their work, process their orders, buy materials, schedule jobs, program your machines, store the files, post-process till you get G-code out, make packing slips, issue POs to vendors, all the QMS that's keeping, hopefully, if you're, serving regulated industries, all the quality management software that's managing it, all the way out to on the shop floor where you're dealing with work instructions, you're presetting tools, you're making sure jobs are going smoothly, in-process QC, all the way to making invoices and packing slips and closing out your books and doing it all over again.
Yeah, I think and there's great software out there for everything you just said now.
There is, yeah. And much of it is being disrupted by solutions where AI is now a part of it. And Bryce, you obviously have a ton of experience there. It's what we talked about in the first episode that you were on with us. So yeah,
I love your description, Paul. It's you touched on all of the aspects of a business. How you run a shop, and there's not one part of your business that isn't touched digitally. Really, at the end of the day, even the machine itself is digital in its core, right? So,
sure.
Thinking about a digital tech strategy after you set up your business is, maybe a step late when you should be thinking about how you design your workflows and work process with digital in mind. And I think we're going to get into like the idea of a paper-driven process versus digital process, and what would that mean, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm clearly biased on this point, being in the business of taking shops paperless and starting with my own 23 years ago. Yeah. I guess was when we got rid of our paper travelers. So
I think anybody that's gone through that cycle is probably biased. I don't think it's just you. It's a game changer.
But many are fearful of it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But maybe not unexpected. Anything new can be scary, but I don't know a single person that said they've gone digital and they wish they would go back to paper. That has never come out of anyone's mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, like really, thinking about even just starting at that most basic level, we've all dealt with customers, vendors, and I guess maybe more vendors, that it's, Johnny 1942 at gmail.com, right? Versus, whatever at xyzcorp.com. And, even there, when we talk about, I know in our next series, in our next session, we're going to talk about, more of that kind of marketing and establishing a sales channel. But even there's an element of, so just starting at that early stage and we talked about this when we talked about even naming your company. Is there a domain available? And you pick that domain and you setting up even just your email as part of that digital backbone. With you're putting a more professional image forward if you own your domain and you have that, but right out of the gate you need to decide kind of like how are you going to be maybe a Microsoft Exchange shop, hosting all that? Are you going to go the Google route? There's options there, like we're an Exchange shop. I think Paul, you run off of Google, right?
Yeah, have for 20 years. At ProCNC and a ProShop
and for making chips, we run off of Google.
Yeah, we have a Google Suite.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it also begins with a mindset. In my career, companies either look at IT, and I'm just going to call IT a way of reflecting your tech stack, as either a cost center or an enabler for your business. And if you start with the mindset that the tech stack is a cost, right, not something that magnifies the potential of your business, I think it's first the mindset. So you have to understand the potential of the technology. And when you look at it, you actually will want to design your business around the technology with the technology in mind. And I think that's the first, barrier that people have to overcome is it's just a mindset that it's a cost. It's hard to run a business without it, in fact. And really, Paul, you know this better than anyone, that the technology is an enabler, it's an accelerator, and it magnifies the potential of everything you do. So that's the first thing. What's your mindset going into this? And I think of it as an enabler, as a business opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting to have you say it that way because it's definitely true. We talk to folks that are in both camps. They're like, this is an expense I have to incur, trying to get it for as cheap as possible. And, just because they feel like it's necessary. And there's others that are like, this is absolutely a strategic advantage to me to have this, whatever digital system I have in place. It's going to make me more competitive, make me, more attractive to my customers, and really think about the upside of it.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because I can tell you just through my own, tech journey inside of Hill. I would guess, putting it the way you put it, I think early on we probably saw it as a necessary expense. And, fast forward 6 or 7 years, we see it as our competitive advantage, our entire tech stack. It's what allows us to fill our mission to deliver quality parts on time every time.
And Mike, when you were making those decisions around the tech stack, did you look at it through the lens of a business case or a value stream? I'm just curious. You've been on both sides, running software business and a manufacturing business. It's so difficult sometimes to make technology decisions with a business outcome in mind. What was your approach?
I was looking for, as you pointed out, my background in specifically really in integrating with ERP systems. I knew the value they brought to the table, but I also knew they're expensive, right? So yeah, just kind of looking for that, does it bring, for me, I was looking, and I guess I probably look at most of our technology this way. It's like, what savings will it bring to the table? And what do I have to gain from that, right? So in the case of today, where most of software is in a SaaS environment, software as a service environment, it's easier for me to break down, okay, if it costs me $70 per user per month or whatever the case might be, what does that equate to in efficiency that it needs to bring, where it's at worst a break even scenario for me, right?
Sure.
So an ERP scenario, that's easy. And we have machine monitoring, and we have a lot of things that are on either a per user or per machine basis. And it's easy for me to then break it down. Does it gain me an hour of productivity a month, right? That will make up that cost. And in the cases of things we've done, we've determined that it will make that, we've determined on the front end that we will get that, at least that much savings or increased productivity. And then we've seen multiples of that number really in real practice.
Sure.
But the shift in my mind now is, so that's the decision-making process for me. But what I've seen is it's so much bigger than that. If you build your tech stack out correctly, that it actually is a competitive advantage over a lot of the people in my market. They don't have the same things I have. They can't communicate with their customer to the degree I can. They can't be as proactive as I can. They don't, can't necessarily be proactive of the job that is on the floor today, in getting information about that and changing the outcome of that job while it's in process versus after I've invoiced it, right? There's nothing I can do then. And they can get that same advantage. This technology is on the market, but in my case right now, in a lot of cases, that's a competitive advantage for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I know we're going to talk about several categories. I would love to go upstream of that just for a second longer. We talked about, email address. Obviously, at this point, it's pretty easy to buy a domain, have it hosted, have an email service that goes along with your domain as opposed to a Gmail account, right? Whether it's GoDaddy or one of the other myriad of companies that provide that service. I think those are really well worth it. And we'll get into more of that in the marketing side. And then there's, not many shops use a CRM, but I think there's, especially if you're going to be a sales and marketing driven business, as I espouse, is super critical to any business that's want to grow. Having some kind of basic CRM is, I think, really important, right? There's a million out there. Some of them are super cheap. Some of them are very expensive. Having something that's right sized. We use HubSpot. There's free HubSpot. I can see some of the shops out there that I'm on their newsletters. I can just see the way the newsletter is sent that it is a HubSpot newsletter, right? So there's ways to, very inexpensively build into your tech stack ways that you can market and sell to your customers in a way that's going to help, grow your sales in the future. So I think that's something that's worth thinking about.
That's an area that I have not done yet. that I actually would like to deploy.
And you're lucky that you're still growing at strong growth rates because of everything else you're doing right. But
sure.
But yeah, I do think it's important part of it. So then, then what comes next? You win a customer, you marketed to them, they sign up with you, and now you need to quote their work. Is that the next thing?
That would be the next step in the process.
Yeah. So for decades, people have quoted on printing off the paper drawing, writing something on the corner of the drawing. $10 for material, 5 hours of machining, $20 for this or that, and then they have their price. And of course, spreadsheets came after that, and lots of people still use those. Paperless Parts has been a good sponsor here of the show. Obviously, really, really very specific, estimating and quoting software.
And that spectrum is wide, right? I mean, like when I bought Hill, they were using Excel spreadsheet, and what I found, and this is the danger of any spreadsheets, because everything we're talking about, one of the options will always be a spreadsheet and some form or something you fill out. But I can't even tell you how many businesses I've seen. One of the first things I've ever done when I'm coaching a business is go in and look at how they price a job, how they quote a job, whether it's in manufacturing or construction. It doesn't matter, right? Like you always have to quote a job. And Hill was like so many others I've seen. Somebody walks me through the spreadsheet. I'm like, okay, yeah, that all makes sense. You have setup time, you have material, you've got run time, you get all this stuff. But there's a broken formula. Right. And because we're now using this spreadsheet for the 300th time.
And it's a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah. And that one time 150 times ago, you changed from a sum to an average or something, right?
Yeah.
And then every time since then, you've been using it. There's just some broken formula in there. And that's actually the exact example that happened at Hill. Was, we're using a copy of a copy of a copy. And there was like 2 or 3 of the subtotal line items that were not going into the total.
Oh,
right. So, I mean,
that can be dangerous.
Oh, it was incredibly dangerous. I mean, everything was off. We were not sending out an accurate quote. And it was because people were using a copy of a copy of a copy and not a template. Right.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest danger there. Is of that. It'll work. I mean, you can use an Excel spreadsheet and come up with a good quote or a good estimate, but it can break real quick too.
And you don't realize
the thing that comes to mind for me is, kind of the paper-driven process versus the manual digital versus kind of the automated digital. I imagine, how do you get better with your quoting and estimating? How do you look back? If you don't have a digital strategy with automation, you want to know, is my actual versus estimated, is that growing or getting better? How am I closing the gap between the two? And that's super important, right? To get better at quoting and estimating. And, looking back at a job, how it ran, what its actual time, what the setup times were, what the material costs were, being able to do that analysis with the right software package is so powerful, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's even probably that theme, that concept is even a little bit bigger in that to have a cohesive tech stack, you really want the data to flow from each segment of the business as seamlessly as possible with as less amount of manual effort as possible. Yeah. So if you've built, a really kick-ass spreadsheet that is totally dialed in for your shop, but then you need to transcribe that into your order and the traveler and the process plan, and it just takes effort. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be delays. It makes it harder to do a closed loop analysis of how you did compared to what you thought you were going to do. So I think one of the important takeaways from this episode in general is going to be make sure whatever tech stack you're building doesn't rely on human requirements to interface the different programs, at least as much as possible, right? It's probably almost impossible to have everything completely digitally connected front to back, although with APIs, it's becoming more and more possible, but at least minimize it to the greatest degree that you can.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
100%.
If you can go back, almost 30 years now when I was in the software business, and And what we were doing at the time, you had these large manufacturers implementing large ERP systems. I mean, millions and millions of dollars they were spending on implementation of these systems, but they still relied on paper forms being collected on the shop floor. And then, you had a room full of data entry people entering those every day, every night, whatever the case might be. So where we were brought in so often was to eliminate that piece of paper. So we were doing what you would call shop floor data collection, which naturally gravitated a lot towards like barcodes at the time, right? So someone could just scan something and instead of having to type it in, and try to collect that data with as few human interactions as possible. So whether that was pulling information out of a machine, pulling information off of a barcode, something like that, because that's where the errors happen. I mean, they just do. It's not a knock on people. We all misspell a word, right? When we're typing an email, and if you're entering that data, if you've got a room full of, as a matter of fact, I did data entry when I was in college for a medical clinic where you're putting in the little codes that's on the, whatever you're being seen for, and the diagnosis codes and all that, whatever those are called. And, sitting there 10 keying all day long. And it's easy to miss a key, right? I mean, it happens. It's just, and, so that whole, finding that structure that allows you to go from lead to invoice with as little human input as possible is going to definitely benefit you.
That's, I think, kind of the core theme here. If we really think about it, if you look at how you define process in manufacturing, very often you use like a lean methodology or value stream mapping. And, you can go and buy an application and it has data in it, and it's very valuable just by itself. But if you look at the work, and you just laid this out really nicely, Mike, you begin with a customer, you begin with a quote and an estimate, and that has to translate into work orders and ultimately to set up production. And all of those are, served by different applications often. And if you start from the beginning and just do a value stream mapping and think about how I want to design my digital infrastructure to support that value stream, that's a very different mindset than I have this app, it's really good. So you almost think about what's the integration between these? How does the data move? And the key point is, like you said, is not re-entering the same data over and over again. And that's one of the biggest problems is people are re-entering information over and over again. So I think that would be a key thing about the tech stack is to start small and simple, but think forward about how do I digitize the whole workflow so that I don't have to re-enter anything at some point. Doesn't mean you have to go buy everything at once. You just think about it.
Yeah, just look for that integration capability, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Paul, part of what we can talk about here is just my story with you, right? So when I was looking for a system to run my shop, right? So I'm looking for an ERP system. The integrated QMS was important. I don't know if you remember this, but when I went to the 2018 IMTS, I went to look at two things. I knew I wanted an ERP system and I knew I wanted machine monitoring. And I needed an ERP system first. Did a demo with you. That's the direction we went. We looked at some machine monitoring that was at the show at that time. There was a few options there. There's a lot more on the market today. But, the reason I held off on machine monitoring was I wanted it to be integrated with my ERP. Right. And I think I bugged you for 3 or 4 years after I was on the ProShops, like, when are we gonna have some machine monitoring? When are we? And then you called me one day, said, "Hey, there's a company called Datanomics that's using our API to integrate," and I was signed up with them in a week. I mean, it was that integration was the big piece. I mean, back to your point, Bryce, it's just everything working together was what was important to me.
Yeah, the other thing I'd love to, and again, I feel like I'm got to balance the line here of being too self-serving, but having a system that is actually well tailored to your type of business, I think is also crucially important. And that's quite honestly why ProShop exists in the first place. Because when my machine shop was small and we were starting to get overwhelmed by our spreadsheets, we went out and looked for software, and we talked to all the main companies that you would think of for Machine Shop ERP. But to the point that you were just bringing up, Bryce, when you look at it from a value stream perspective, which is the way we kind of were looking at it, it's like all these systems on the market they'll cover the front end just fine. Like you can quote, you can, set up your contacts, your vendors, your customers, and things like that. You can make a work order, but then, because, keep in mind, we had all these spreadsheets that went really deep onto the shop floor. Like my partner, Kelsey, was just a geek about all this, right? We had cutting tool management, we had quality and checks, we had in-process inspection, we had G-code, like where our G54s were. We had all these like really machiney specifically types of things. And so when we asked these companies, all right, great, we quoted the job, we got it. Now how do we transition all that information into all these other things that we're already doing in our spreadsheets? And they're like, no, we don't do any of that. Like you just print off a paper traveler. And then the next time we pick it up is when you make a packing slip, right? That's like the next thing that we do. And we're like, but the machining process, that is the most crucial thing for us to get right. And there's 1,000 details that have to go right in order for this job to be done on budget, on time. And none of them did on any of those things. Right? It was so mind-boggling to us. So that's why we didn't buy one of those and still have lots of spreadsheets, and we started to build ProShop. But so I think that just underscores the importance of really good tools that are really catered to your business. So you're not doing a ton of customizations and having to have lots of other little applications to cover different aspects of your business that you then have to connect with APIs or manually. Things like calibration and preventative maintenance, tool management, all these, inspection and, in-process QA and first articles, all these things that you can buy little point solutions for, but then you got to make them all talk together. So, yeah. And I know, just one last point, I happen to know that there are niche ERPs for every industry you could possibly think of. It's mind-boggling, but, I've come to learn through my travels in the last couple of years that, there's ERPs for linen, commercial linen service companies. There's ERPs for lawyers. There's ERPs for flight schools. There's ERPs for companies that manage porta potties, dumpster, retrieval and dumping. Like there's ERPs for everything. And I think the importance is that they were built out of a need to cater to a very specific type of business, as opposed to a very general, manufacturing type of business where it's very broad. And so anyway, just a little bit, I think of why that's crucial. So you're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Well, and you say, I think that's a great point. I know you said, not to sound too self-serving, to ProShop, but and I guess in all fairness, there's alternatives out there, but back to the topic of integration, right? So the fact that like a ProShop, when we talk about a tech stack of being able to quote and being able to monitor a job and have your QMS so that you can be ISO or AS certified, those types of things, having something like a ProShop, whether it's ProShop or not, is just back to that integration. It's just, it's all one seamless value stream that you have to have. And then, and I think another important piece of the tech stack you need to consider from the very beginning is that integration to an accounting package. And some ERPs have that built in, some integrate into like QuickBook or Sage or Xero or something like that. And again, it's just that integration across the whole thing, building this backbone that's just one seamless value stream from start to finish.
I'd love to share an example of digital monitoring, job monitoring, that for me was extraordinary. So in the aerospace industry, I was working with a company, and they had probably about 20 or 30 factories around the world. And some of the factories were doing similar jobs, and none of the machines were monitored. And they actually it took them a month to roll up the data on machines. So it was a very manual accounting process for a machine. And they wanted to get to cut time. That was their key metric. What was the actual cut time? And when they finally ran through this worldwide analysis, they found, and can never forget this, they found that the same two machines running the same jobs in different countries, they found a 1,200% difference in productivity between the machines, and they had no idea that was, they had no idea that was happening. And I'll never forget that, because I, being more of a technology person who is involved in manufacturing, but not necessarily running the process, I didn't think that was possible. But it is. And even if you're one shop and you don't have many factories, I'm imagining you're going to run the same jobs frequently or even infrequently. And wouldn't it be amazing to know what your cut time was, what the machine was running? It was someone running it slower than normal. These are all have huge impacts on your business. So even if you just, again, take one part of the value stream and look at it, the returns could be tremendous. So that never left me. I always remember that.
That's pretty remarkable.
That really is.
And I'm not making up the 1,200% number. That was actually cubes per minute, 1,200% difference in cut time. And this was like advanced aerospace manufacturing. No one knew why. And that just created, I think the business people who were running the business were like jaw dropped. They had no idea.
So there's so many different tools. Bryce, what's your suggestion on where they should start? Because there's also the scale of the systems, right? Like I've talked to shops that have like a dozen people and they're on Epicor, or 80 people and they're on SAP. It's just like some really good salesperson sold them a very expensive but pie in the sky idea of how great it could be, and it's just killing them. So can you talk a little bit about scale?
Yeah, I think, and I'd really kind of like to start with, where my career in technology started, which is communications and manufacturing. And I think it's almost an afterthought. Oh, I'm going to have Wi-Fi maybe, or I'm going to have Ethernet, and I'll connect up things after I figure it out. I actually think that building a communications fabric that anticipates connecting up all the machines and enabling people to be mobile in the factory, starting there, and having a professional services company come in and map out your environment is so worth the investment, because problems in communications migrate into problems in applications, which migrates into problems in business. And instead of treating it as an afterthought, actually design your factory or start with the tech stack on just the foundation layer, which is communications. And really the next question is security. And you can think of communications and security within the four walls of your plant and have a strategy. And then you can have a strategy for communications and security for how you communicate to the rest of the world. And to me, that's the next big decision. Before we even get to which applications make sense, do you imagine that you're going to want to take advantage of powerful cloud software, which is where the technology is moving? Less and less people are hosting things inside their plant, and they're hosting in the cloud. So that's going to have a big influence on your cloud provider and your internet connection. And you can go cheap if you want, or you can build redundancy into it. And all of these fundamental foundational decisions multiply your risk if you kind of go cheap and don't think about what they really mean underneath your tech stack. And then once you've got this foundation in place, I love the conversation of kind of getting the right application, whether it's ERP or MES or CRM or a quoting or a scheduling system. What's the right application for your business, and how do you want to run your business? And that's, you don't need SAP for everything. SAP is a great software, but it's not necessarily fit for a small 50-person shop or even 100-person shop. Yeah. So that's kind of really a big deal in terms of, and again, I think the application decision is really about thinking about your process digitally and making the decisions about how information moves across your systems. So does information flow easily, or are you having to put a lot of manual labor to get that in? So those are all questions. I'd almost think of this as a Q&A process. Ask yourself fundamental questions, and then it'll help you, prioritize the type of technology that you want for each step in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that foundational part about communication layer. And it makes me realize the tech stack is not just software, but there's also some hardware and firmware and stuff in between that's making the software layer possible.
Absolutely. And, this was the hardest business case to make in my work, in many years of working in manufacturing, the hardest business case. And it was always after the fact, which was frustrating. I never saw a factory design with communications in mind. So it's like, what's the ROI for investing in really solid communications that won't go down? You could make the argument that a application going down, but then it's a risk analysis. Rather, just assume that you want always available. Maybe it's 2 nines or 3 nines of availability. You want to imagine, how would your business run if you didn't have communications? What would that look like? And you don't have to do a complicated analysis to imagine that. So yeah, that communications layer is number one for me. And then it's more about kind of business value, business process, and matching your applications to the reality of what you're doing. And that means, do I have a high mix, low volume, right? Do I have a kind of a high volume, low mix? And there again, your investment is to automate the front end quoting or kind of the back end process, right? So depending on what you're doing, you're going to make your automation decisions, your tech stack decisions are going to be weighted towards the style of business you have. And so if you're constantly changing jobs, like you don't have a lot of volume, that kind of leads to a certain type of technology stack that will profoundly influence. You want to automate where your work is, right? That's kind of the first rule of thumb. You automate what's the most work for you. And that to me would be a big decision, factor.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah, that is.
One of the things that we have certainly seen is companies that bought a software that was sold to them as something that looked really great, and then when they got into it, it wasn't. Or and maybe this is a more complex topic, but they ended up not being happy, possibly because there wasn't the greatest fit of the software, but they also didn't invest enough in the training and the setup and the doing that part well. And then they had potentially a really excellent tool that was really poorly used. Any ideas or thoughts on where people can avoid those pitfalls? How to go about that, making sure you're launching that technology well?
I have one immediate thought that comes to mind on that. Involve all the people in your company in the decision, right?
Yep.
Don't make a tech stack decision. Often people will fear the technology if they don't understand it. So bring them into the decision-making process, and I think they will have an opinion on, will it make their jobs easier or harder? And I think that's a key consideration, as you make these technology decisions, is involving everyone in the process, in the decision-making process.
Paul, I would add that too, when you start talking about all these different things, look at the community around that product, right? So, use accounting software as an example. So you've got, if you're, I think most companies in our space under, I don't know, a large size, will do just fine with like QuickBooks, right? But you got Xero, there's Sage, there's a ton of accounting packages out there, just like ERP and everything else. The nice thing about like QuickBooks in the accounting environment is there are millions and millions of people across this country that know how to use QuickBooks. So hiring somebody to run my accounting, if I've got QuickBooks as my accounting backbone, is not that hard to do, right? There's a lot of people, all your accounting firms have people that know how to use QuickBooks. Everybody knows how to use it. It's a simple package. It does much of the same stuff, and people are starting to learn it. But you start getting, I see this in a lot of different areas, even like, going back to your CRM, right? There's people that know how to use HubSpot, and there's a lot of training resources. Look at, ProShop and ERP. You guys have an amazing community around it. You've built lots of training modules around it. There's always new stuff. There's always really cool stuff. But if no one knows how to use it, you're just stuck, right? Like you don't know what to do with this great new piece of software you got. So that, in addition, I think the communication piece that's such a great take. And as we've gone more and more digital, and a storm rolls through and knocks out our connection, we realize just how reliant we are on technology. Mm-hmm. So having that redundancy and stuff is critically important. But I think kind of the same goes for, as you pick these different software packages, make sure that, if your accountant leaves, you can find somebody else who knows how to use QuickBooks pretty quick.
Yeah, that's been, candidly, that's been sometimes an obstacle for us, is people are like, no, I have to have fully integrated accounting, built right into the ERP. And sometimes they say, I want a quote unquote, with air quotes, if you're watching the video, I want a complete system, right? That includes that. But I offer the same argument that oftentimes those are pretty sort of kind of obscure systems to learn. There's really not a great, pool of resources to hire for it. And then what are the other parts of the business that it doesn't actually help you manage? Like in our case, pretty much anything about the actual manufacturing process.
Sure.
And I would say that's pretty incomplete of a system if it doesn't include all these other super essential things to the execution of your business.
Yeah, maybe a good way to sum that up. I mean, like personally, I would rather have really good systems in those different disciplines that talk to each other than one system that tries to do it all but isn't very deep.
Yep,
that makes complete sense. I want to bring up a topic, which is, and both of you have run shops. Mike, you're running one today, and Paul, this is your pedigree is how to run a shop, and you've done that. What about the topic of cloud and how you view it and how you see the industry looking at it? I mean, and who do you choose? Do you go with Google, Microsoft, Amazon? Do you have to go all in with one? I'd love to explore that a little bit, because we all live with cloud now, just personally. So, how do you run a business without it is the question in my mind.
Yeah, I think it's increasingly hard to do it without it, or you're just limited in the tools you have available to you. But there are definitely companies, as I'm sure probably know better than anyone, that they got their on-prem server, they got their in-house Exchange server. They're all about keeping it in their four walls. But obviously, there's a huge amount of expense associated with managing a very increasingly complex, IT system. So if you want to employ full-time IT staff, and buy, I don't know, $25,000 servers every couple of years, plus all the ancillary stuff. But I think there's an argument for really minimizing your on-site IT, just to basically have workstations that are not even necessarily on a domain. They're just all connected straight to the cloud, and that cloud is where everything's being served from. And there are clearly examples where there are still challenges accessing the internet in a super robust, fast way these days. There's still shops in the middle of cornfields in Iowa that do not have fast internet.
Sure.
So now there's Starlink now, and there's more and more options to get connected. And sometimes those are the backup options, which is important to consider. Bryce, as you were talking about, really thinking about the whole system and the communication layer, right? If you got cable internet or fiber, but a construction worker down the street cuts that cable, you're kind of dead in the water if everything is on the cloud. So what do you do?
Yeah. And the way we've approached it, in the past is, it's not so much that, you should consider operating without cloud. It's more like, what's your continuity plan in case it does go down, so that you can continue operations during that period. And that planning around, the potential outage really pays off if it ever happens, because it will, right? At some point, you're going to lose communication or connection, and that is a common thing. But there are ways to mitigate it, and there are ways to make sure that you can run your operations and not miss a beat for 5 hours, 4 hours. When that inevitable backhoe cuts a line someplace, know it happens.
That does.
Which we know happens.
We face it, and having some redundancy is absolutely critical for sure. You don't want everybody running off their personal hotspot on their phone.
No, but I think a hotspot is actually a pretty viable option.
It is
for a 20, 30, 40 person shop, just to get just the basics of data pushing back and forth, you're not going to
we've done it.
Yeah. So a business hotspot, a 5G hotspot that is totally unrelated to your normal internet connection but I'm actually, Bryce, Mike, how do you do it? You have this 5G hotspot that, is run by the business. Maybe it costs you $30 a month to just have it there. How do you get it connected into your network so the actual people on the computers in the shop can connect to it?
I call a guy.
You call a guy. So you don't actually know. So Bryce, how do you do
it? Well, you first off, that hotspot is a gateway between domains. One is private and the other is public. And typically within that gateway is a configuration that allows for a translation between the internet domain and your domain. So you'll have some type of network plan, communications plan that includes address space, and you'll turn on the translation. It's called network address translation. That's the very basics of it. And then you can get more sophisticated with security. Maybe you want to obscure kind of who's talking from where inside as you go out. So there's a whole bunch of considerations. And whether you use a 5G hotspot or use like a really powerful firewall, it's still the same principle. There's a private domain and a public domain. And really it's key to figure out, how you bring those two together. And there's a ton of technology, and there's the guy you can call who will set that up for you, who knows it inside and out. And that's a common practice. And the other thing I think about, just kind of as a related topic, is if you're not investing in your tech stack, and every young person in the world right now is so technology enabled and is so used to using productivity tools just in their daily life, how do you get the sharp people into your shop if you're not thinking about the technology that they're already using outside? If you're not using the stuff, maybe you don't have to have social media running on your machine, but there's a how do you bring in the best people and attract them if you're kind of 20 years behind in your tech stack? I think that's a real cost to bringing in talent, is they're not seeing the technology and the automation that they see in just their everyday life. So I've always encountered that as an obstacle for manufacturers who are like, I can't attract people. Well, maybe it's because, you're antiquated in your technology approach. So that's a cost that is hidden sometimes. You can't see it.
Yeah,
that's a great point, though.
Yeah, I think that's part, it kind of goes back to what we said early on, where it's, I see our tech stack as part of our competitive advantage now, right? That's not just with customers.
Yeah.
That's also with attracting and retaining top talent, whether it's robotics, whether it's AI, whether it's, you're younger, to your point, your younger generation for sure. They want to be in a tech savvy environment. And so, I think it's all part of that same. And, we kind of joke about having your guy, but I think that is an important part to talk about. And you talk about, a tech stack. I don't have a full-time IT person, but I do have a company that I spend hundreds of dollars a month with, right? Not thousands or anything like that, that provides part of that tech stack. And part of that tech stack is, hey, Derek, we've got a problem. And he can remote in, he can be here in 20 minutes, whatever, and fix the problem. And that is something you need to consider too, as you rely on technology as part of your overall strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of my own kids who are going into manufacturing, and their questions are, what are they doing with robotics? What are they doing with software? How do they do this? As they try to figure out where they want to fit into this world. I want to program machines. And I think of the questions that they ask are around the tools very often that they're going to be using. So it is a big consideration.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to maybe lay out, might be helpful for folks, is what's the right thing to buy it and grow on and build as you go. You can't start with every tool under the sun on day one. So coming back to some of the things we've already talked about, if I were starting a brand new shop today, I would certainly make sure, first of all, that I look like a professional business with my own domain, my own email address. I don't think I would start with CRM, to be honest, to start off with, because when you're tiny and you're only chasing a few prospects, you can easily manage that, on a spreadsheet or in your head or in some simple system as opposed to a full-on CRM. But obviously having an accounting system is pretty much essential these days. So you got to have that chosen. And there are the QuickBooks of the world. And as you said, Mike, Sage or some of the newer ones like Xero. But I think I'd keep it pretty mainstream as opposed to a really specialized, bigger system. They get expensive fast.
Sure.
And they get really complicated fast. Again, being totally biased, I would definitely think a basic type of ERP is pretty essential from the beginning. We have several one-person shops running our software, right?
Yeah.
And they think that they produce far more revenue and deliver better results and get more jobs out the door with it than without it. But I've heard other people say, yeah, you really don't need an ERP until you're like 20 people. I just completely think that's not correct. They're thinking of it probably in that old school way, Bryce, as just a cost center only, not as an actual asset to drive strategic growth and as well. But then probably in a machine shop, your CAD CAM absolutely has got to be one of those first things you're doing, unless you're making parts so simple you don't need CAD CAM, but right. You're going to need it. There's obviously so many options out there. It's probably hard for us to give any advice on them, but I'd say the advice I would give is, if at all possible, can it integrate in with your other tools, right?
Sure.
Can you sync your tool list to your ERP or to your machine monitoring, or what ways can you kind of make that data layer smoother? And then, once you really start needing to maximize your throughput, machine monitoring, I think, is a really important tool, increasingly important tool, and the more machines you have, the more you can't really tell what's going on and how often they're running and why they're not running. And people are always surprised when they hear that, a typical vertical machine, if you're lucky, runs 25% of the time. And, tools like machine monitoring can really help you uncover why. But I do think you then need an ERP to really fix the whys when it's the right type of system that has tools to do that. I don't know, Bryce, what else would you say, or Mike, what else would you say sort of as you're tacking on more and more stuff in the future? Obviously, everything we talked about, especially if you're serving a regulated industry these days, it's got to have cybersecurity pretty solidly built into it.
Yeah, without question. I think, the top things for me are, training your people to use the tech stack, whatever it is. I think it goes without saying that if you don't train people to the potential of these technologies, then you're missing out on the tech itself. That's one thing. Cybersecurity is typically an afterthought, and it's only thought about until you have some type of event. And it's whether you're small or large, there's always the risk that someone's going to hack you for whatever reason. And it's very painful when it happens. So kind of the investment early on in having a consultant or, an expert in this space to help set you up is super, super important. I can't say that enough, that being secure in what you do, and obviously as you get into government contracts, it becomes super important to do that. So that's an investment area, just like basic communications that go without saying in order to support all these apps. So those are key things from my perspective that I would emphasize that often will get overlooked.
Yeah, I think for me, having bought a very mature business, we'd been in business for 41 years, and when I bought it, and there's a lot of infrastructure in place, whether it was IT or not, right? There's still infrastructure. And you hear people talk about the cost of an ERP system, or the cost of, maybe a good communication infrastructure, or the cybersecurity issues and all those types of things. And my take is it's a whole lot cheaper to do it right from the beginning than to circle back around and try to do it all, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, I would love to have an ERP system when my shop was 3 machines and 2 people, right? Because you could really spend the time to build everything out correctly. Same way with your accounting package, same way with your IT infrastructure. Yes, it can be expensive, but in my viewpoint, again, I see it as part of our competitive advantage. It certainly, I gain efficiencies through all these technologies that we use. And I think in a lot of cases, it also helps my top line, and I'm able to show that I have all these systems in place to ensure that I'm going to provide the customer with what they need, which is good parts on time. right? Mm-hmm. And I can't even tell you how many times a meeting with a customer or potential customer has turned into as much of just a presentation of our technology and our process more often than, some random conversation about whatever, right? It's here's how I ensure quality. Here's how I ensure I'm going to get you parts on time. Here's the systems I have in place. Here's the communication that you can expect from us. Those types of things. To me, it's not, like I said, early in this transition for us, I saw a lot of it as a cost center, and now I don't. It's absolutely, it's a revenue generator and it's a efficiency tool that just makes us better. And I think the earlier you start that process, the better you'll be.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up. I've been beating the drum for a long time that your business management system, which really entails all of your tech stack, is a fantastic sales tool. And having it be at a certain level, I think, is table stakes at this point. Like if you have a customer come for an audit, and you're showing them all your filing cabinets, they are not going to be super confident, inspired that you are a super solid supplier and have everything they need. You need to be responsive to them and make sure you're doing it all, in a way that's going to be a world-class, you're going to be a world-class vendor for them. So I think that is an important part.
And under the context of, people listening to this series, we want to be a top shop, right? We've talked a lot about being a top shop. Everybody can buy the same lathe. Everybody can buy the same mill. Everybody can, all those things. Yes, you can have more experienced machinists or less experienced, whatever, but it's your entire process that allows you to shine with your customers and in the market.
Yeah.
And all of these things, enhance that entire process.
Yeah. Good way to say it.
Absolutely. And there's the top manufacturers in the world, there's a reason they have chief digital officers, right? I'm not saying that a shop should have a chief digital officer necessarily, but it's because it's so essential to the business that it deserves a function all to itself. And in a big company, of course, that makes sense. But you can make that part of your core value system in the company, is that we may not have a chief digital officer, but we certainly have a chief digital plan and strategy. And I think that is super critical for empowering all the things you want to do.
Well said. Well, guys, I think we covered a lot of good ground today. Yeah, we talked about the specific solutions that, people need to solve. We talked about the layer of making sure these things are all talking to each other. You have redundancy, how you can use it as a sales tool, just how it can affect better outcomes. I think, once you have the right tools in place, you're going to win more jobs. You're going to have fewer mistakes making them. You're going to deliver them on time at better margins. You're going to be a more profitable business, which means you can reinvest. So it really is a virtuous cycle, I think. And being a top shop, which thanks to our friends at Modern Machine Shop Magazine, or one of the sponsors of this series, is really one of the things we're trying to help equip and inspire people to be able to do is be at that elite level of a business, which obviously the tech stack is a huge part of that.
Absolutely. And growing every day.
Yeah, you bet. So next, the notes are telling me here, the next episode in our series is going to be about building your brand and growing your sales, so you can actually fill up your shop with good work and have your tech stack working smoothly to deliver it cost effectively. So look for that one next. And in the meantime, Bryce, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you bringing your wisdom. Mike, always good to have your thoughts on this. Someone in the trenches every day doing it, like so many of our listeners.
Well, yeah, thanks to a good tech stack.
So what do we say? How do we wrap it up? When you have a good tech stack, your machines can be cutting chips more often, because if you're not
making chips,
you're not making money. Bam.